Welcome back, everyone. Now we have a very interesting case study on opportunities and challenges for different generic drug types. And I have great pleasure in introducing Stefanie Mal. She's Global Project Manager at Sandoz. And Stefanie has more than 20 years experience in leading development programs of generic products, focusing on small molecules for many pharmaceutical dosage forms and for all big global markets. Stefanie is currently global lead of small molecule development programs in Sandoz. So over to you, Stefanie. I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome to everybody to my little presentation. And I want to share something. So let me just check that I can share my screen. Share. That one. No, this doesn't work. So sorry again. I need to.
Yeah. So you see a screen sign with a cross on the bottom, red cross or red line. Just click on that. Yeah.
Give me a second, and now here we are, right?
Perfect.
Perfect. So, thank you very much. So, yeah, today, and I think this fits very nicely to Samir, what you just presented. So you were coming from the portfolio strategy, and now my turn is to talk a little bit more about, okay, and how can I make it happen, right? And just again, to recap, if you want to be a generic global player, and if you want to do a product for the global market, then there are always two aspects you have to regard, right? The one thing is the market. So can I be successful in the global, on the commercial side? But then, of course, also technical side. How can I realize the whole product? And here it's important to say, okay, let's check some markets, because I mean, you cannot do this for all markets around the globe. That's impossible. 200 countries, well, not feasible. So let's focus on some of the key markets. And for my presentation today, I have selected out of the top 10 countries of the world with the most population, 6 countries which are also important for us as Sandoz, because they have an interesting generic product market. And this is US, Brazil, Europe, Russia, China, and Japan. And together, these 6 markets alone represent 1/3 of world population. So you have quite a big reach if you're successful in these 6 markets. But of course, the markets are very different. So the key is, on the one hand, if you set up such a strategy and then also go into execution, there are always the 2 parts you need to be successful. It's the commercial side and the technical side. And the commercial side is, of course, and Samir, that's what you also said in maybe some little different words, but the same message. So what does the market really need? What do the patients need? Which therapeutic areas? Which product? But on the other side also, who will pay for your product? Yeah, is it a tender market? How are the healthcare systems set up? To be very honest, also, how rich is the country? Yeah? So can they afford products? And how can you fit to these requirements? But then, of course, and this is today my major topic, once you decided to develop a product and you want to go global with it, then you come into the situation of technical questions. And with technical, I mean the broad picture. So all the things you have to regard when you want to develop, manufacture, approve, and launch the product at the end. This means there are things which are, let's say, site conditions in every country. They may be a little bit different in the details, but in general, there are things like the reference product. If you want to go generic, usually you need to refer back to an originator product. So is this product in the market? Yeah, is this approved in that market? Can you buy it? Can you do bioequivalence study against it? Can you compare it? Can you work on this? This is an important piece. So otherwise it can be quite difficult. Another piece is, of course, the patent landscape. So how is this market set up? Is it a basic patent country? So let's say there are no additional supplementary protection certificates, patent term extensions, or are there additional extensions which delay your possible launch date? How is the situation about formulation patents? There are some countries where these patents are very strong and defended very hard. Other countries where you can sometimes also kill them, yeah, or you can circumvent them. Indication patents. So how is this market set up? Can you go, if there's one indication protected by patent and two others not, can you go with a carve out, or is this from that country not possible because there are any rules against it? Supply chain is an important piece. Yeah. So where will I manufacture my product? I mean, that's something, Samir, you also touched. Yeah. So do I have a manufacturing site, either my own or a partner, where I can at the end manufacture it? And how is the patent situation in this country? The same is, of course, with my APIs, the active ingredients. So will I do them by myself? Will I purchase them from another country, from another company? So is this company in a patent-free country? Can I purchase it early enough to have a day one launch? So all these questions need to be regarded, of course. Then you have topics around inspections. Nowadays, in COVID times, it's pretty difficult because many of the authorities of the countries want to visit your manufacturing sites in person. So at least in history it was like this. Now it starts to become more virtual, but still somebody needs to come to your site, needs to inspect it and tell, yes, it's fine, that you get the blessing for these manufacturing. That's quite challenging. For example, Chinese authorities, very new to them, how to deal with this. Quite an interesting situation currently. Then, of course, also the regulatory requirements. I mean, many of the people here in the stream today probably are super familiar with all these challenges you have. So the definition of a generic product, for example, is very important. Yeah. So how similar do you need to be that you can claim I'm a generic and I refer back to the originator, my medical document? Do I need to have a one-to-one copy of the formulation, or can I do design around formulation, which can go back to my patent strategy? What about dosage forms? There are countries which are insisting to have the same dosage form and others not. So that's also something, for example, Japan, you can go often also with oral dissolvable tablet, so ODT, instead of a film-coated tablet. And still it's a generic and the market prefers that one. This is by far not the case in all the other countries of the world. So these are the typical things where you then have to see, okay, can I use this one product globally, or do I need to spread out my developments into different areas? I will come to that point later. Another question is, can I use different salts? In some countries, it is still possible, so you can circumvent salt patents. In other countries, it's not. I mean, in Europe, for example, often it is possible. You can go with a different salt. In US, no, usually not. China, forget it. Japan, forget it. So these are the differences in the markets. You all have to bring into your original development strategy. And then, of course, you come into the area of the pharmacopoeias. Each of these big markets I was showing you has its own pharmacopoeia with all their own general chapters. And if you want to apply for approval in such of these countries, and let's again take, for example, the Asian countries, China, Japan, you have to follow these general chapters also, not just the individual monographs, but also how do I do the solution testing. This is all playing into your global strategy. And beyond this development strategy, you go also into the question of specific requirements from the country by itself. So trade dress, which is more a market topic, yeah, very specific in Japan, for example. Then do you need any additional specific accreditations? Japan, typical case. Are there any specific additional requirements you need for reimbursement? Yeah, so or for a tender participation. Russia is a classical example where you have the rule, so-called 3 is a crowd, and this means if there's a tender and there are already 2 companies applying for this tender, which have a local manufacturing and supply chain, then you cannot participate in this tender with an imported drug. So then you need to have a local manufacturing there in Russia. So all these things need to be regarded when you go setting up a structure and developing a global product. And let me now give you an example how such a strategy looks like, for example, for a film-coated tablet. So the starting point usually is US. Why US? Because it's the earliest country where I need to submit my product. And this means I have there just 4 years after originator approval until I can submit. And I think most of the countries know how this is, most of spectators know how this is going. You have this NCE-1 date, and then you can submit if you go also for an IP challenge. So this means also usually latest 2.5 years after launch of the originator in US, you need to start your development, if not earlier, yeah, depending on the difficulty of the product. It may also be recommendable to start even earlier. And then you start branching out this basic development you do for US into further markets. One of the next markets usually can be Canada, because Canada, you can use often nicely the data you create already for US, you extend them to Canada, and then you go into an additional Canadian BE study. So then usually you can submit there also pretty soon. And then, and Samir, this goes also back to you before, usually then you have to take care about China pretty soon if you want to hit a day 1 launch in China. Up to now, I mean, China is a rapid, constantly changing market, and so currently patent situation, for example, is changing there, new patent law coming into place. This means we have currently still basic patent expiries, but in future there will be a SPC and a patent linkage similar to US. But up to now, still the thing is you should launch at basic patent expiry. This means you're super early with this country, but you have another challenge here in China. This means either you have a COPP registered, so already a marketing approval in another country, then you can import the product. You will get an imported drug license. Or if you don't have this, and usually in this scenario I'm just showing here, you don't have this approval in another country where you can pull a COPP, then you have to go into a local manufacturing, which is also pretty challenging. Either you have your own manufacturing site, then you can transfer it into China and manufacture there, or you have a CMO, also quite an interesting challenge. But let's say China is also currently one of the early markets where you have to start your development early in order to meet a day 1 launch, or at least a wave 1 launch. And then finally you can start with your European scope. If the product is, let's say the patent situation is similar, you can still go with the more or less 1-to-1 copy you're doing for US. Then you can use that formulation also and build your European dossier on this data. This means you have here then already the formulation. You may need to add another set of dossier batches, but for sure what you need to do is to add European BE study If you want to go with a design around formulation and you don't have this for US, then of course you also would need to do a new formulation, which is then more or less a new project itself. Yeah, but usually or often you can build on the knowledge you have already created for US. Yeah, and then you can start finally to branch out into the world. And here, for example, it's then again, you use these European data for Russia, and also you can use them for Latin American countries. And here, just showing Brazil as an example, as it's the biggest market there. For Russia, of course, you need, again, local PE study or studies. And I referred already to that one. Do you need a local manufacturing site? Because then you need, again, to make another transfer in order to be able to participate in tenders. Brazil gives another set of challenges. Here, especially, we are talking about the climatic zone 4 stability, which is needed. So you need quite a tight package, you need a good stable product, which can be challenging if you talk about polymorphs, for example. So I saw already significant challenges sometimes in that area. Also, of course, you need local PE studies. And at the end, you have also to consider that there's this testing in the official labs there, so your product gets tested in the regulars. So this is another thing. It costs you quite some time, usually it's 2 to 3 months in order to get all these testings done. And then last but not least, the last big market I didn't show you is Japan. It's an important market, but a very specific one. So it's not always possible to use the global formulation also for Japan. To be very frank here, sometimes it is possible, but you have some big hurdles to overcome. The one hurdle is the trade dress. So in this example, film-coated tablet, often the trade dress in Japan needs to be with an imprint because this is the typical market there. So that's why sometimes your trade dress is not feasible, so you have to do another set of batches. Or you need, for example, triple testing in your stability, or let's say 9 samples per testing point. This means either 3 times for 3 batches, or you go with more batches. That's not the requirement usually for other markets. You have to go with all strength, otherwise you won't get an approval. That's also something very specific for Japan, because Japan often has lower dosage forms and, for example, half of the dosing compared to other markets. So then you have to add this strength on top to your global development. And yeah, these are, let's say, the major things. You need also accreditation of manufacturing sites, accreditation of API sites. So there are quite some additional challenges, but usually it's worth doing it. It's an interesting market. So here I have just summarized all the things I told you just now, but now the question is, what's different if I go into steriles? And so here, just an example for normal injectables, steriles. So there are some opportunities, some risks also. Let's first go with the opportunities. And I think everybody is aware, usually for an aqueous solution, for injection, you don't need PE studies, which is a good advantage. If you are talking about prolonged release products, it looks different. So let's say oily solutions or crystal suspensions, then many markets require also PE studies, just referring back China, Japan, very specific. Okay, and then also, of course, some additional challenges you have. There's, of course, for liquid injectables, this climatic zone 4 in Brazil, sometimes a challenge. Can also be for other dosage forms, that's clear, but especially here, going to be considered, again, the topic of local manufacturing sites, often not so easy to find one which can do your product. And again, in Japan, I have the 100% visual control, which is also here very important. So each vial needs to be checked visually. It's quite a little cost tag in your manufacturing. Plus, high trade dress requirements also here. So don't try to sell a vial where your label sticks not correctly in the right place. Forget it. And then there's just one little last product I'd like to talk, or product class, which is a little bit a different category. So OTCs. And here the question is it possible at all to bring one product globally as OTC to the market? And my answer is no, I never saw one. So, and the reasons are simple. Different markets, very different requirements. Usually people have to buy it by themselves, so it's more local products usually. The approvals are very different. In some countries you need to go with a normal drug application, and in others you go as a food supplement, China as an example. And also this rule whether a product is an OTC or it's sold only on basis of a prescription from a physician is usually a local legislation. So it's not the same in all countries. This is why my answer to the question, is it possible, is I don't believe, I never saw one. So that's just as a little side remark with regards to OTCs. Can you go global? I don't believe so. And let's say now, to summarize all our learnings we have from this topic, generics around the globe. So my learning is start global, make a global strategy, consider all the points, but develop then on the regional basis, leverage one on each other, and the launch is anyhow then a local topic. And one important piece, and I want to mention this here, you need very good local specialist teams. Otherwise, there's no way to succeed. And with this also, a big thank you to all my teammates around the globe in the development centers from Sandoz, but also in all our countries, because they do a great job. And with this, I want to give back to you. And I'm open for questions now.
First of all, vielen Dank. Thank you very much, Stefanie. This was very interesting. And I know it is very challenging to put all this information in just a short span of 20-25 minutes, but you did great. So I heard some things very interesting, virtual regulatory inspections. Actually, I am a management consultant right now, so I don't go to pharma companies these days, especially in lockdown. So I was wondering, how is this experience?
Yeah, so to be honest, currently the authorities are almost not visiting the sites. It's difficult, sometimes they come, but it's really seldom. So where we have already experience is with audits. So how do you do it also with your internal colleagues or auditing your, let's say, API companies? And we have in the meantime quite good experience with these remote audits. So you send one person there just who is already a resident in that country, let's say, I don't know, Russia, for example, and then the rest of the team is going remote. This is pretty well working. And also Chinese authorities, we noticed that they are doing quite a lot of remote inspections as well, so that they really just ask for all the documents, review them, and then you have all the video cons where you discuss all the topics. So it's more and more going digital, but my personal opinion here is you never can go completely without people. You need to send somebody there, right?
Yeah, exactly. One other question which just came to my mind was last year, not exactly last year, 2019 especially, there were, and I know this is related to project management and portfolio development, there was a lot of concern about timelines, or the tight timelines for implementation of barcodes and topics like that, because you mentioned a few times about dress code and packaging, etc. So just out of curiosity, how is it going with respect to implementation of barcodes? It has gone a little slower now, or it's still the same?
Still challenging. I mean, yeah, usually, let's say there's one challenge because the systems in the countries are diverse. Yeah, so the globe couldn't agree on one system. So you have different requirements in different countries, like always. Yeah. And it is challenging. So for each launch, we are planning quite a certain additional time in order to set up this properly. Especially now, again, our Asian countries and China now here in focus also. It's challenging, it's feasible, but you need to consider some more time in order to set this up properly. And especially maybe just as a background information, Chinese market is also very special for the whole manufacturing side, because there's this system of volume-based tenders. So you apply for a tender in September, you get the decision in late November around, yeah, and then you commit already to deliver first amounts in January. So this means you have almost no time to manufacture. This means, again, you have already to start manufacturing at risk. So it's a tricky thing in order to succeed in this big market. But of course, once you're in, you have high volumes. That's the advantage again. So it is a different game. It's also a risky game. That's clear.
Yeah, Stefanie, thank you very much. Also, so very nicely summarizing, if I may use the word, a template or a toolkit with respect to how to take up planned development between different geographies, the way you explained US and then extending it to other geographies, and from Europe you can extend to Russia and Brazil and other similar geographies. I think that's very helpful. And one of the challenges I'm pretty sure you are also facing in your company, and all companies are facing, are multiple RLDs, which innovators have now as a barrier to entry of generics. So that's also a topic. And I also very much appreciate your closing statement: start global, develop regional, launch local. I think very well summarized, Stefanie. Thank you very much.
I think there's one other topic just for everybody to regard. There are markets which are more or less stable. They are mature with regards to rules. And there are other markets which are still evolving, like China, also Brazil, Russia, where you have changing requirements. So what I showed today is a status quo, what I would do today. This doesn't mean that it's the right strategy tomorrow.
Absolutely.
That's our experience.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So we have a couple of more minutes, and I am hoping that some of the questions pop up in the chat box, which I am seeing here. But everybody is, let me tell you, Stefanie, in the meanwhile, that everybody is appreciating your nice slides. Baha from your team, as well as Ritu have also from your team has also mentioned, or Sandoz team, I mean, remote audits have been good alternative wherever feasible. Mithun says, thanks for wonderful presentation, but nobody is asking questions, which is also a clear indication that the presentation was pretty good.
Yeah, okay. I mean, often the devil is in the detail. I mean, I could talk hours about these details. Yeah. So when you go, for example, in Japan into the solution testing, so you need to be the same F2 test. So everything the same in all 4 media. I mean, this is not the rule in all other countries. So it gave us quite some struggles sometimes, yeah, to fulfill this requirement.
Yeah, so in the meanwhile, sorry for interrupting you. In the meanwhile, Peter Stemfel is asking, what is the reason that EU can be followed only 8 years? I mean, I think he is referring to your slide where you mentioned.
So usually your data exclusivity in Europe is 8 years. So it's 8 plus 2, right? So this means after eight years after approval of the originator, you can submit your generic application, and 10 years after this date, you would get your approval. So this means it doesn't make sense to submit earlier because authorities won't accept your submission. This is the 8 years I was referring to. And that's why start in US and Europe follows later.
Okay. So thanks again, Stefanie. It was a pleasure interacting with you, and thanks also for a wonderful presentation. So now we reach a networking break time. So it's 10:30. And the next panel discussion will start at 11. So thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.